So today we are going to begin making our Beanie Baby project. First, you want to make sure that you have your directions in front of you. You only get one set of directions, so make sure you do not lose them and make sure that your name is on your rubric that's attached to your directions. You're going to need to keep this in your binders for the entirety of the project. So be sure your name is on it. So up at the top of the directions, I went ahead and added one extra step. At the very beginning, you're going to first cut your paper pattern from the paper around the solid black line. And you're going to do this with paper scissors, not your fabric shears. Cutting paper with your fabric shears will actually make your shears dull and it will be hard to cut fabric later. So be sure you're using paper scissors to first cut out your pattern from the paper. So you can tell if they're paper scissors because usually they will have paper written on the scissors. So decide if you're going to do the dinosaur or the frog, and you're going to cut out your paper pattern piece from around your paper, just kind of like right outside the thick black lines. Okay, so once you've got your paper pattern piece cut out, so here's an example. I've cut out my paper pattern piece. Be sure you've cut out and around those notches there. You do not want to cut those off. That's going to show you where to start and stop sewing when you start to sew around your entire Beanie Baby. So be sure you have cut those out. You see two nice triangles. There's two in the frog as well. Be sure you cut out and around those. Okay, so now once you've cut out your paper pattern piece, it's time to place it on your fabric. If you're using sample fabric, you just want to make sure you have a double layer and it's folded with right sides together. Sample fabric doesn't actually have a right or wrong side. It looks the same on both sides, so it doesn't matter what sides are facing each other. Just make sure that you have a double layer on top of each other and it's laying nice and flat. If you are using a printed fabric, you're going to have a right and a wrong side. So this is obviously the right side, the side you want people to see, and the wrong side is the side that you don't want people to see. So be sure when you fold your fabric, when it's folded, that the right sides, both right sides, are being folded together on top of each other. So that when you look at your little sandwich here, I see the wrong side on this side and I flip it completely over, wrong side on this side, and that my right sides are facing each other on the inside. So once you folded your fabric, right sides together, on a double layer, you're going to take your pattern piece and place it on top of your folded piece of fabric. Or if you're using the printed fabric, be sure your pattern piece is laying flat on your printed fabric. Once you've got your pattern piece placed on top of your double layer of fabric, go ahead and pin your pattern to your fabric. You're going to do this with your pins that are in your pin cushion right here. And be sure you pin all the way into each of the corners. So on this dinosaur, I have a pin in the tail, a pin for each of the legs, at least one pin around the curve of the back, and probably at least one pin in the head. For the frog, I've already pinned him. So I've pinned in his arms, his head, his other arm, leg, and you might want another one in the center of the body. So once you've pinned your pattern piece to your fabric, now you're going to cut out your pattern piece. So this time you're going to cut out on the solid black line, not the dotted line, but the solid black line all the way around your pattern piece and cut it out of your fabric. Don't remove those pins yet. You want to make sure that you've cut out 2 layers of fabric that are the same shape as your pattern piece, and it's a double layer since you had it folded on a double layer. Alright, so I've cut out my pattern piece. Now it's time to transfer those stitching lines. So to transfer your stitching lines, which are your dotted black lines, you want to use a tracing wheel and tracing paper. So tracing wheel and tracing paper are 2 of our marking tools, and you use the tracing wheel to transfer the colors, which are chalk or wax, from the tracing paper all the way to your fabric, so you know where to sew for this project. So you're going to choose a color. There come in lots of different colors. You want to choose a color that's going to show up on your fabric. So if I'm using blue fabric, I probably shouldn't pick blue tracing paper. So pick a color that's going to show up. So for my fabric, my frog here is blue, so I'm probably going to pick a yellow or a white. So let's go with yellow for today. So there's 2 sides of your tracing paper. There's a colored side and there's a white side. The colored side is the one that you want to transfer to your fabric, so make sure the color side is facing up. If you have the white side facing up, your color is going to go to the table and not your fabric. So have the color side facing up, and then you're going to take your beanie template with the fabric still attached to the paper, and you're going to use your tracing wheel, and you're going to trace on top of these lines, the stitching lines, the whole way around your frog or your dinosaur, and make sure you change the positioning of this so you can get all the stitching lines transferred to the back of the fabric. This is going to show you how to stitch, so you want to be sure your lines come out very clear, and it's going to take some pressure, and you're going to have to push really hard to get those lines to show up. Alright, all the way around, nice and smooth around those corners. So when you're done, for this one, I finished tracing my lines and I removed my paper, or I flipped it over to the wrong side. I can see that where my tracing lines were. So my tracing lines were yellow with my tracing paper, and I didn't show it very well, so I went ahead and just traced over them with my pencil. You're welcome to do that if you can't see your lines, but now you can see that my tracing lines, stitching lines that were on my paper, I've now transferred to my fabric using a tracing wheel and tracing paper. Once you are done tracing your lines, be sure you remove your paper pattern piece and then re-pin your dinosaur together, putting those pins back in the same places. You want to leave them together so that you can stitch your Beanie Baby together easier. Make sure your pins are within your stitching lines, so inside your stitching lines, because you're going to be stitching over top of the lines you drew on your fabric. And if your pins are hanging out over your fabric, you won't be able to sew over top of them. You're going to have to move those. So make sure they are within your fabric, pushed in, and they're holding your fabric together. Once you've pinned your fabric together, with the right sides still together, so my right sides are together and my wrong sides are facing out, you can go to your sewing machine and you can begin sewing your Beanie Baby together. You want to start sewing at one of the notches, so pick one notch to start at. You'll start sewing at one of the notches and stitch all the way around. Don't forget to backstitch beginning and end, and then you're going to end at the other notch and backstitch there at the end. So you're backstitch beginning, sew the way around, backstitch at the end, and then what you should have is a gap about this far apart between your two notches, and that's what you're going to use to turn your Beanie Baby inside out and fill it with rice. So you need to have that gap there. Be sure there's a backstitch at the beginning and end. If you forget, go back and add it. If you don't have that backstitch, your beanie's going to fall apart. Once you've sewn your Beanie Baby together, it's time to clip and notch. You're going to do that to reduce the bulk. You're going to clip your inward curves, like going in, and notch your outward curves. So I have an example here of my frog. On the inward curves, whatever's going in toward the animal, like these two, you're going to clip those inward curves. On any outward curves that are going away from the animal, you're going to notch those outward curves. So his head right here would be notched. The inside of his arm would be clipped, clipped, notched, clipped, notched, clipped, notched, clipped, notched, clipped. So you get the idea. You're notching the outward curves and then clipping the inward curves, where I have highlighted. Once you've notched and clipped, now you're at the teacher checkpoint. Be sure you stop and check with me before you proceed, and then you are ready to turn your animal inside out. Don't forget to stop and see me at the teacher checkpoint so you can get half your project right.